What if I told you that at your age, the most powerful response you can give to certain questions isn't a clever comeback or a detailed explanation, but complete and strategic silence? Most people think that wisdom comes with age means having all the answers, being able to explain yourself better, or having the perfect response to every question. But that's not wisdom at all. True wisdom after 55 is knowing which questions deserve your energy and which ones are designed to diminish your worth. Today I'm going to share with you 7 questions that you should never, ever answer after the age of 55. These aren't just annoying questions or rude inquiries. These are psychological traps disguised as innocent curiosity, and they're designed to make you justify your choices, defend your lifestyle, and prove your worth to people who have no right to judge you. And if you're new here, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. We share wisdom and practical guidance specifically for people navigating life after 55, and I don't want you to miss any content that could help you live with more strength and dignity. But first, let me tell you about Margaret, a 73-year-old retired teacher who discovered the power of strategic silence the hard way. For years after her retirement, Margaret felt compelled to answer every question thrown her way. When neighbors asked why she was taking art classes at her age, she launched into lengthy explanations about personal growth and lifelong learning. When her adult children questioned her decision to travel solo, she provided detailed justifications about her safety precautions and financial planning. Margaret thought she was being transparent and reasonable. What she was actually doing was training everyone around her to believe they had the right to interrogate her life choices. Every answer she gave was treated not as information, but as an invitation for further questioning, more judgment, and deeper intrusion into her personal affairs. The turning point came during a family dinner, when Margaret announced she was considering selling her house and moving to a smaller condo closer to downtown. Instead of congratulations or support, she was bombarded with questions. Don't you think you're too old to start over? What if you can't handle the move? Why would you leave all your memories behind? Are you sure you've thought this through? Margaret found herself spending the entire evening defending a decision she hadn't even finalized yet. She went home feeling drained, second-guessing herself and wondering if everyone else could see something she couldn't. That's when she realized something crucial. The questions weren't coming from a place of love or concern. They were coming from a place of control. Margaret's neighbor, Helen, who had been observing this pattern, shared something that changed Margaret's perspective forever. Helen said, "Margaret, you've spent 40 years teaching other people's children, raising your own family, and contributing to your community. You don't owe anyone an explanation for how you choose to live the rest of your life." That conversation sparked Margaret's transformation. She began studying Stoic philosophy and discovered that the ancient Stoics understood something most people today have forgotten. Your peace of mind is more valuable than other people's understanding of your choices. The Stoics taught that we cannot control what others think, say, or ask, but we have complete control over how we respond. They understood that some questions are not requests for information, but attempts to exert power and control over your decisions. Margaret learned to identify these psychological traps and respond with what the Stoics called dignified silence. She stopped explaining herself to people who weren't genuinely interested in understanding her. She stopped justifying her choices to people who had already made up their minds to disapprove. The transformation was remarkable. When Margaret stopped answering invasive questions, something interesting happened. The people who truly cared about her began to respect her boundaries and support her decisions. The people who were trying to control her either learned to treat her with respect or gradually faded from her inner circle. Today, Margaret is living in her beautiful downtown condo, taking pottery classes, traveling to places she's always wanted to see, and enjoying the most peaceful period of her adult life. She often tells people, "I wish I had learned the power of silence decades ago." The 7 questions I'm about to share with you are the ones that Margaret and countless others like her have learned to recognize as traps. These questions may sound innocent or caring on the surface, but they all share the same underlying assumption that you need to justify your choices to other people simply because you've reached a certain age. This assumption is not only wrong, it's insulting. You've lived long enough to earn the right to make your own decisions without having to explain them to anyone. You've gained enough wisdom to know what works for you and what doesn't. You've accumulated enough life experience to trust your own judgment over the opinions of people who don't walk in your shoes. The Stoic philosophers understood that freedom isn't just about having choices. It's about having the courage to make those choices without seeking validation from others. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "How much trouble he avoids who does not look to, see what his neighbor says or does, but only to what he does himself." So stick around until the end, because what you're about to learn will change how you approach every conversation and every relationship for the rest of your life. You're going to discover not just which questions to avoid answering, but why. Your silence is actually a form of strength, not rudeness. You won't want to miss this. Before we dive into the specific questions you should never answer, I want you to understand something that will completely change how you view silence. In our society, we've been conditioned to believe that silence means you don't have an answer, that you're being rude, or that you're somehow weak. But this couldn't be further from the truth. The ancient Stoics understood that silence is one of the most powerful tools in human communication. They didn't see it as an absence of response, but as a deliberate choice to maintain your dignity and protect your peace of mind. Epictetus, one of the greatest Stoic philosophers, taught that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. But he also understood that there are times when we shouldn't speak at all. Let me share with you 3 Stoic principles that will transform how you think about silence, especially when dealing with invasive or manipulative questions. The first principle is what the Stoics called the discipline of desire. This teaches us that we should only desire what is completely within our control. You cannot control what questions people ask you, but you can absolutely control whether you choose to answer them. When someone asks you a question that feels invasive, judgmental, or manipulative, your desire should not be to convince them or change their mind. Your desire should be to maintain your inner peace and protect your energy. Think about it this way: when someone asks you, "Don't you think you're too old for that?" They're not actually seeking information. They're expressing their own discomfort with your choices and trying to get you to conform to their limited expectations. No amount of explanation will satisfy someone who has already decided you're wrong. The Stoic response is to recognize this and refuse to participate in a conversation that has no positive outcome. The second principle is the discipline of action. This teaches us that our actions should be guided by wisdom, not by other people's expectations or reactions. When you feel compelled to answer every question, you're allowing other people to control your actions. You're essentially giving them the power to demand your time, energy, and justification whenever they please. But when you choose strategic silence, you're taking back control. You're saying, "I will not allow your curiosity, judgment, or discomfort to dictate how I spend my mental and emotional energy." This is not selfishness. This is self-respect. You've earned the right to be selective about which conversations deserve your participation. The third and most important principle is the discipline of assent. This teaches us that we have the power to decide what thoughts and ideas we allow into our minds. When someone asks you a loaded question like, "Aren't you worried about being a burden to your family?" they're not just asking for information. They're trying to plant a seed of doubt and anxiety in your mind. If you engage with this question, if you start explaining why you're not a burden or listing all the ways you contribute, you've already accepted their premise that you might be a burden. You've allowed their negative assumption to take root in your thinking. The Stoic approach is to reject the premise entirely by refusing to engage with it. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, wrote in his personal journal, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." This is the essence of strategic silence. You cannot control what questions people ask, but you have absolute power over whether you allow those questions to disturb your peace of mind. Here's what most people don't understand about silence. It's not passive, it's active. When you choose not to answer a question, you're actively protecting your boundaries, actively preserving your energy, and actively maintaining your dignity. You're making a conscious decision to prioritize your well-being over someone else's need for information or control. The beauty of this approach is that it immediately separates people into 2 categories: those who respect your boundaries and those who don't. The people who truly care about you will understand that you don't owe them explanations for your personal choices. They might be curious, but they won't pressure you or make you feel guilty for not answering. The people who become angry, persistent, or manipulative when you don't answer their questions are revealing their true intentions. They're not asking because they care about you. They're asking because they want to control you, judge you, or feel superior to you. Your silence exposes this, and that's exactly why it's so powerful. Seneca, another great Stoic philosopher, wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." Learning to embrace strategic silence marks the end of feeling obligated to justify yourself to everyone, and the beginning of living with true freedom and dignity. But silence isn't just about refusing to answer. It's also about how you carry yourself when you choose not to respond. The Stoics taught that our demeanor should reflect inner calm and confidence. When you choose not to answer a question, you should do so with grace, not defensiveness. You should maintain eye contact, keep your posture relaxed, and perhaps offer a gentle smile. This communicates that you're not angry or upset. You're simply choosing not to engage. Sometimes a simple, "I prefer not to discuss that," is sufficient. Other times you might redirect the conversation to a more positive topic. But often the most powerful response is no response at all, just a calm, confident presence that says, "I am secure enough in my choices that I don't need your approval or understanding." Remember, you've lived long enough to know yourself. You've made enough decisions to trust your judgment. You've faced enough challenges to prove your resilience. You don't need to prove any of this to anyone else. The questions I'm about to share with you are designed to make you forget these truths and turn you back into someone who seeks external validation for internal decisions. The Stoics understood that the goal of life isn't to please everyone or to be understood by everyone. The goal is to live according to your own values and wisdom while maintaining your inner peace. Strategic silence is one of the most powerful tools for achieving this goal. Now, let's examine the first question that you should never answer after 55, and I'll show you exactly why your silence is not only appropriate but necessary for your well-being. The first question you should never answer after 55 is, "Don't you think you're too old for that?" This question is perhaps the most insidious form of ageism disguised as concern. It comes in many variations. Aren't you a little old to be starting a new hobby? Don't you think you should act your age? Isn't that something for younger people? But regardless of how it's phrased, this question has one purpose: to shame you back into a box that someone else has decided is appropriate for your age. What makes this question particularly dangerous is that it sounds like it's coming from a place of care or wisdom. The person asking might even believe they're protecting you from embarrassment or failure. But what they're actually doing is imposing their own fears and limitations onto your life. They're asking you to surrender your dreams, curiosity, and growth simply because you've reached an arbitrary number of years on this earth. Let me tell you about Frank, a 67-year-old retired accountant who discovered his passion for skateboarding. Yes, you heard that correctly. Frank had always admired skateboarders from afar, and after his retirement, he decided to finally learn. He started slowly, practicing in empty parking lots, wearing all the proper safety gear, and gradually building his confidence and skills. Frank was having the time of his life. He felt more energetic and youthful than he had in years. The physical challenge was invigorating, and the mental focus required to learn new tricks kept his mind sharp. He even started making friends with other skaters at the local skate park, people who appreciated his dedication and courage regardless of his age. But then came the questions. "Frank, don't you think you're too old for that? What will people think when they see a 67-year-old on a skateboard? Aren't you worried about getting hurt? Don't you think you should find a more age-appropriate hobby?" At first, Frank tried to answer these questions. He explained that he wore protective gear, that he was careful, that his doctor had cleared him for the activity, that he was happier than he'd been in years. But something interesting happened. No matter how thorough his explanations, the questions kept coming. People weren't satisfied with his answers because they weren't really looking for information. They were looking for him to admit that they were right and he was wrong. Frank realized that these questions weren't about his safety or well-being. They were about other people's discomfort with seeing someone break free from age-related expectations. His skateboarding challenged their belief that life after 65 should be quiet, cautious, and predictable. It reminded them of their own self-imposed limitations and unfulfilled dreams. That's when Frank discovered the power of silence. The next time someone asked him if he thought he was too old for skateboarding, he simply looked at them with a calm smile and said nothing. The silence was incredibly powerful. The person asking the question had to sit with their own words, and many of them realized how presumptuous and limiting their question actually was. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." In this case, the best response to someone trying to limit your dreams is not to become someone who limits yourself. Frank's silence was his way of refusing to participate in his own diminishment. Here's what Frank learned and what you need to understand. When someone asks if you're too old for something, they're not asking about your capabilities, your health, or your safety. They're expressing their own fear of aging and their own acceptance of societal limitations. They're projecting their resignation onto your enthusiasm. The Stoic response to this question is to recognize it for what it is, an attempt to make you smaller so that others can feel more comfortable with their own smallness. Epictetus taught that no one can hurt you without your permission. When you choose not to answer this question, you're refusing to give anyone permission to make you doubt your right to pursue what brings you joy. But here's the beautiful thing that happens when you stop answering this question. You give yourself permission to be fully alive at any age. You stop looking for external validation for your choices and start trusting your own judgment. You realize that age is just a number, and it has no bearing on your capacity for growth, learning, and joy. Frank is now 70 and still skateboarding. He's also taken up rock climbing and is planning to learn how to surf. The people who used to question his choices have either learned to respect his boundaries or have found other targets for their limitations. Frank's life is fuller, more adventurous, and more authentic than it was when he was trying to live up to other people's expectations of what a man his age should do. The question, "Don't you think you're too old for that?" is based on the false premise that aging means accepting less from life. It assumes that your dreams have expiration dates, and that your capacity for new experiences diminishes with each passing year. But you know better than that. You know that some of the most fulfilling experiences of your life might still be ahead of you. When you encounter this question, remember Frank's example. Remember that your silence is not rudeness. It's self-respect. You don't owe anyone an explanation for choosing growth over stagnation, adventure over resignation, or joy over social conformity. Your life is your own to live, and the only person qualified to decide what's appropriate for your age is you. The next time someone asks, if you think you're too old for something, don't answer. Instead, let your actions speak for themselves. Let your enthusiasm, your courage, and your commitment to living fully be your response. Your silence will protect your dreams from people who have forgotten how to dream, and your example might just inspire someone else to break free from their own age-related limitations. Now, let's move on to the second question that's designed to diminish your worth and why your silence is the most powerful response you can give. The second question you should never answer after 55 is, what do you do all day now that you're retired? This question might seem innocent, even friendly, but it's actually loaded with judgment and assumptions about your worth as a human being. What the person is really asking is, how do you justify your existence now that you're no longer economically productive? They're operating under the assumption that your value as a person is tied to your productivity, and that retirement is essentially a long, slow slide toward irrelevance. The question implies that your days should be accounted for, that you need to prove you're not wasting time, and that your activities need to meet someone else's standards of worthiness. It reduces your rich, complex life to a simple productivity equation that you're expected to defend. Let me tell you about Dorothy, a 64-year-old former nurse who spent 40 years caring for others in a demanding, high-stress environment. After retirement, Dorothy was looking forward to finally having time for herself, to explore interests she'd never had time for, and to live at her own pace for the first time in decades. Dorothy's typical day might include reading a novel over Morning coffee, tending to her garden, taking a long walk in the park, calling an old friend, preparing a leisurely lunch, pursuing her photography hobby, or simply sitting on her porch watching the world go by. These activities brought her joy, peace, and a sense of fulfillment she'd never experienced during her working years. But when people asked Dorothy what she did all day, she felt compelled to justify her choices. Well, I volunteer at the library twice a week, and I'm taking a cooking class, and I help my neighbor with her grocery shopping, and I'm organizing all my old photos. She would rattle off activities like she was defending herself in court, trying to prove that her life had value and purpose. The problem was that no matter what Dorothy listed, the response was often the same. A slight nod followed by, "That's nice," delivered in a tone that suggested her activities weren't quite substantial enough. The underlying message was clear. What she was doing wasn't real work and therefore wasn't particularly important. Dorothy began to internalize this judgment. She started feeling guilty about the quiet moments in her day, the times when she wasn't being productive in ways that others could easily measure. She began filling her schedule with activities not because she enjoyed them, but because they would sound impressive when people asked what she did all day. The turning point came when Dorothy's sister visited for a week. Her sister, still working full-time, was exhausted, stressed, and envious of Dorothy's peaceful lifestyle. "I can't wait to retire and have time to just breathe," she said. "You're so lucky to finally be able to live for yourself." That comment made Dorothy realize something crucial. She had been allowing other people's narrow definition of productivity to rob her of the joy she'd worked 40 years to earn. She'd been apologizing for living the life she'd dreamed of, simply because it didn't fit someone else's idea of how retirement should look. Dorothy discovered the wisdom of the Stoic philosopher Seneca, who wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." Dorothy realized that explaining her daily activities to people who couldn't understand their value was exactly the kind of waste Seneca was talking about. The next time someone asked Dorothy what she did all day, she tried something different. She simply said, "I live," and then changed the subject. The person asking looked confused, perhaps expecting the usual defensive list of activities, but Dorothy held her ground with a gentle smile. Here's what Dorothy learned and what you need to understand. The question, "What do you do all day?" is based on the toxic assumption that human worth is measured by busyness and productivity. It ignores the possibility that you might be living intentionally, savoring experiences, or simply enjoying the peace you've earned after decades of hard work. The Stoics understood that leisure is not laziness, it's freedom. Aristotle wrote about the concept of schole, which meant freedom from the necessity of being occupied. This wasn't idleness. It was the space to think, reflect, create, and simply be human, without the pressure of constant productivity. When you answer this question, with detailed explanations of your daily activities, you're accepting the premise that your retirement needs to be justified to others. You're allowing people who are often stressed, overworked, and envious of your freedom to judge how you spend the time you've earned. But here's the truth. You don't owe anyone an account of your days. You've already given decades of your life to work, to raising families, to meeting obligations and fulfilling responsibilities. This stage of your life is yours to design according to your own values and desires. Some days you might volunteer, travel, or pursue hobbies. Other days you might read, reflect, or simply enjoy the luxury of having nowhere you have to be. Both types of days have equal value because they're both expressions of your freedom to choose how you spend your time. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." When someone asks what you do all day, they're asking you to justify your present moments to someone who wasn't there to experience them. They want you to reduce the richness of your lived experience to a list of activities they can evaluate and judge. Your silence protects the sanctity of your daily experience. It refuses to reduce your complex, meaningful life to sound bites that can be measured against someone else's standards. It honors the fact that some of the most valuable parts of your day might be the quiet moments that can't be easily explained or quantified. Dorothy now lives her retirement with confidence and joy. When people ask what she does all day, she sometimes says, "I enjoy my life," or I do whatever brings me peace. Or she simply changes the subject. She's learned that people who truly care about her well-being don't need detailed reports of her daily activities. They're happy knowing she's content and fulfilled. The question, "What do you do all day?" assumes that your life needs to be productive by someone else's definition. But you've earned the right to define productivity for yourself. Maybe productivity means growing tomatoes in your garden. Maybe it means reading books that feed your soul. Maybe it means having long conversations with friends or taking naps when you're tired. Your retirement is not a trial where you need to present evidence of your worthiness. It's a reward for the decades you've already given to others' expectations and demands. Your silence protects this reward from people who would diminish it with their narrow understanding of what a meaningful life looks like. Remember, the most productive thing you can do with your retirement is to live it authentically, joyfully, and on your own terms. You don't need anyone's permission or approval to enjoy the freedom you've earned. Now let's examine the third question that's designed to make you feel guilty about your boundaries and why your refusal to answer is actually an act of self-respect. The third question you should never answer after 55 is, why don't you help more with the grandkids? This question is particularly cruel because it weaponizes love against you. It assumes that your relationship with your grandchildren should be measured by the amount of free babysitting you provide, and it suggests that you're being selfish if you're not constantly available for childcare duties. What makes this question especially manipulative is that it's often asked by your own adult children, people who should be respecting your boundaries rather than exploiting your affection. The question ignores several important truths: that you've already raised your children, that you have your own life and interests to pursue, that grandparenting and parenting are different roles, and that your love for your grandchildren doesn't obligate you to provide unlimited free childcare services. Let me share the story of Robert, a 69-year-old retired electrician whose daughter Lisa had 2 young children. Robert loved his grandchildren dearly and enjoyed spending time with them, but he also valued his independence and had his own plans and interests. He would babysit occasionally when asked with reasonable notice, and he never missed important events like school plays or birthday parties. But for Lisa, this wasn't enough. She had gotten used to relying on her parents for childcare during her children's early years, and she expected this arrangement to continue indefinitely. When Robert started declining some last-minute babysitting requests because he had his own plans, Lisa began asking pointed questions. Why don't you want to spend time with your grandchildren? Don't you care about helping your family? Why don't you help more with the kids? At first, Robert tried to explain. He would list all the ways he did help and support his grandchildren. He would detail his other commitments and activities. He would try to make Lisa understand that he loved the children but also needed to live his own life. But his explanations only seemed to fuel more questions and guilt trips. Dad, you're retired. What else do you have to do that's more important than your grandchildren? Lisa would ask. The implication was clear. His retirement meant he should be available as an on-call babysitter, and any other activities he might want to pursue were selfish and unimportant compared to her childcare needs. Robert began to feel guilty about having his own interests and plans. He started canceling activities he enjoyed so he could be available whenever Lisa needed childcare. He felt trapped between his love for his grandchildren and his desire to maintain some independence and personal fulfillment in his retirement years. The situation came to a head when Robert had planned a weekend fishing trip with old friends, something he'd been looking forward to for months. Lisa called the night before asking him to babysit because her regular babysitter had canceled. When Robert explained that he had plans, Lisa exploded. I can't believe you're choosing a fishing trip over your own grandchildren. Why don't you help more with the kids? What kind of grandfather are you? That question, what kind of grandfather are you, was the final straw. Robert realized that Lisa was trying to redefine his role as a grandfather to match her needs as a parent, and any deviation from her expectations was being framed as a failure of love or character. Robert thought about his own grandfather, who had been loving and present but had also maintained clear boundaries about his availability. His grandfather had taught him that love isn't measured by the amount of free services you provide, but by the quality of the relationship and the genuine care you show. The next time Lisa asked why he didn't help more with the grandchildren, Robert chose silence. He didn't launch into explanations or justifications. He didn't list all the ways he did help. He simply looked at her with calm eyes and changed the subject. His silence spoke volumes. He refused to defend his right to have a life beyond his grandchildren. Here's what the Stoics understood that many modern families have forgotten. Love should never be used as a tool for manipulation or control. Epictetus taught that we should not be upset by other people's actions, but rather by our own judgments about those actions. When someone tries to guilt you about your level of involvement with grandchildren, they're making a judgment about what your love should look like, and you don't have to accept that judgment. The question, why don't you help more with the grandkids, is based on several false assumptions. First, it assumes that your primary role in retirement should be as unpaid childcare. Second, it assumes that your love for your grandchildren should translate into unlimited availability. Third, it assumes that you don't already contribute enough to their lives. But here's the truth. You can love your grandchildren deeply while still maintaining boundaries about your availability. You can be a wonderful grandparent without sacrificing your own interests and independence. The quality of your relationship with your grandchildren is not measured by the number of hours you spend babysitting them. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best way to take care of the future is to take care of the present moment." When you maintain healthy boundaries with your adult children about childcare, you're modeling self-respect and independence. You're showing your grandchildren that it's possible to be loving and caring while still honoring your own needs and interests. Robert's story has a positive ending. Once he stopped explaining and defending his boundaries about childcare, something interesting happened. Lisa began to appreciate the time he did spend with the children more. She stopped taking his help for granted and started asking for babysitting with more notice and respect. She also began to see him as a person with his own life and interests, not just as a free childcare resource. Most importantly, Robert's relationship with his grandchildren improved. When he wasn't feeling resentful about being taken advantage of, he could be more present and joyful during the time he did spend with them. The children sensed this difference and began to see their grandfather as someone who chose to spend time with them because he wanted to, not because he was obligated to. When someone asks why you don't help more with the grandchildren, they're really asking you to justify having boundaries around your time and energy. They're suggesting that your love should be measured by your availability and that your retirement should be primarily dedicated to their convenience. Your silence protects your relationship with your grandchildren from becoming transactional. It preserves the joy and spontaneity of grandparenting by refusing to turn it into an obligation or a guilt trip. It honors the fact that you've already raised your children and that this stage of your life should be about enjoying your grandchildren, not providing free childcare services. Remember, you can be a loving, involved grandparent while still maintaining boundaries about your availability. Your silence isn't selfishness, it's self-respect. And when you respect yourself, you teach others, including your grandchildren, to respect you too. Now let's explore the fourth question that's designed to control your living situation and why your housing choices are nobody's business but your own. The fourth question you should never answer after 55 is, when are you going to sell that big house? This question is a perfect example of how people feel entitled to have opinions about your most personal decisions. Your home is more than just a building. It's your sanctuary, your memories, your independence, and your security. Yet people will casually ask when you're going to sell it as if your living situation is somehow their business or concern. What makes this question particularly invasive is that it's often disguised as practical advice or loving concern. The person asking might say they're worried about you maintaining such a large space, or they might suggest that you don't need all that room anymore. But what they're really doing is imposing their own ideas about what your life should look like based on your age. The question assumes that getting older means accepting less space, fewer possessions, and reduced independence. It suggests that you should downsize your life to match other people's expectations of what someone your age should need or want. But you know better than anyone else what kind of living situation makes you happy and comfortable. Let me tell you about Eleanor, a 71-year-old widow who lived in the 4-bedroom house where she and her husband had raised their 3 children. After her husband's death, Eleanor found comfort in the familiar surroundings, the garden she'd spent decades cultivating, and the neighborhood where she'd built lasting friendships. The house held 40 years of memories, and every room told a story of her family's life together. But according to Eleanor's adult children and well-meaning friends, the house was now too big for her. They constantly asked when she was going to sell it and move to something smaller. "Mom, you don't need all that space anymore," her daughter would say. "Wouldn't a nice condo be easier to maintain?" her son would suggest. "Don't you think you'd be happier somewhere with less upkeep?" her neighbors would ask. At first, Eleanor tried to explain why she wanted to stay. She talked about her emotional attachment to the house, her beautiful garden, her friendly neighbors, and her sense of security in familiar surroundings. She explained that she could afford the maintenance, that she had reliable help for the things she couldn't do herself, and that she was perfectly capable of deciding what kind of living situation worked best for her. But her explanations were met with more questions and suggestions. But what if you fall and no one hears you? What if the house becomes too much to handle? Wouldn't it be smarter to sell while the market is good? The questions never stopped, and Eleanor began to feel like she was constantly defending her right to live in her own home. The pressure intensified when Eleanor's children started sending her listings for retirement communities and smaller condos. They would show up with real estate magazines and brochures, acting as if Eleanor's move was inevitable, and they were just helping her plan for it. They began discussing her situation as if she wasn't capable of making her own decisions about her living arrangements. Eleanor started to doubt herself. Maybe they were right. Maybe she should sell the house and move somewhere smaller. Maybe she was being stubborn or impractical. The constant questioning made her feel like she was doing something wrong by wanting to stay in the home she loved. The turning point came when Eleanor's sister visited from out of town. Her sister, who lived in a small apartment, spent the week marveling at Eleanor's beautiful home and garden. "I can't believe they want you to sell this place," she said. "This house is part of who you are. Why would you give up something that brings you so much joy?" That conversation helped Eleanor realize that the pressure to sell her house wasn't about her well-being at all. It was about other people's discomfort with the idea that she might be too old to live independently in a larger home. It was about their own fears of aging and their need to see her conform to their expectations of what someone her age should do. Eleanor discovered the wisdom of the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius, who wrote, "The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it." Eleanor realized that she had been allowing other people's thoughts about her living situation to change her own feelings about her home. She had been letting their fears and expectations cloud her own judgment about what made her happy. The next time someone asked Eleanor when she was going to sell her house, she tried something different. She simply said, "I'm not," and then changed the subject. When they pressed for explanations or tried to convince her otherwise, she remained silent. Her silence was her way of saying that her housing decisions were not up for debate or discussion. Here's what Eleanor learned and what you need to understand. Your home is your castle, regardless of your age. You have the right to live wherever makes you happy, comfortable, and secure as long as you can afford it and maintain it to your standards. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your housing choices, and you certainly don't need to justify them to people who don't have to live with the consequences of your decisions. The Stoics understood that security and peace of mind come from within, but they also recognized that our physical environment can support or undermine our inner peace. Seneca wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. But that doesn't mean you have to end your relationship with a home you love just because other people think you should." The question, "When are you going to sell that big house?" is based on ageist assumptions about what kind of living situation is appropriate for someone your age. It ignores your personal preferences, your financial situation, your emotional attachment to your home, and your right to make your own decisions about where and how you live. When you answer this question with detailed explanations about your maintenance plans, your financial situation, or your emotional attachment to your home, you're accepting the premise that your housing choices need to be justified to others. You're allowing people who don't have to live with your decisions to judge whether those decisions are right for you. But here's the truth. Where you live is one of the most personal decisions you can make. Your home should reflect your values, your preferences, and your needs, not other people's ideas about what someone your age should want or need. Whether you live in a mansion or a studio apartment, a house in the suburbs or a condo downtown, the only opinion that matters is yours. Eleanor is now 74 and still living happily in her 4-bedroom house. She tends her garden, hosts holiday dinners for her family, and has converted one of the bedrooms into an art studio where she pursues her painting hobby. The people who used to pressure her to sell have either learned to respect her decision or have stopped bringing it up. Eleanor's quality of life has improved dramatically since she stopped trying to justify her housing choices to others. Your home is your sanctuary, your security, and your choice. When someone asks when you're going to sell it, they're really asking you to conform to their expectations about how someone your age should live. Your silence protects your right to make your own decisions about one of the most important aspects of your life. Remember, you've worked hard to create a home that reflects who you are and what you value. You don't need anyone's permission to continue enjoying it, and you don't owe anyone an explanation for your housing choices. Your home is your business, and your silence keeps it that way. Now let's examine the 5th question that's designed to control your spending habits and why your financial choices are yours alone to make. The 5th question you should never answer after 55 is, don't you think you should save your money instead of spending it? This question reveals one of the most toxic assumptions about aging, that once you reach a certain age, you should stop enjoying your money and start hoarding it for some undefined future need or to leave a larger inheritance. It suggests that spending money on yourself, your interests, or your happiness is somehow irresponsible or selfish once you've reached retirement age. What makes this question particularly insidious is that it often comes from the very people who stand to inherit your money. Adult children, relatives, or even friends will question your spending choices as if they have a right to approve your budget. They'll frame their concern as financial wisdom or planning for your future, but what they're really doing is trying to control how you use the resources you've worked a lifetime to accumulate. The question ignores several important truths: that you've earned the right to enjoy your money, that you're the best judge of your own financial situation, that your money is yours to spend as you see fit, and that tomorrow is never guaranteed to anyone at any age. Let me share the story of Walter, a 68-year-old retired engineer who had saved diligently throughout his career and had accumulated a comfortable nest egg for his retirement. Walter had always been financially responsible, living within his means and planning carefully for the future. Now in retirement, he wanted to enjoy some of the fruits of his decades of hard work. Walter decided to take a luxury cruise to Alaska, something he'd dreamed about for years. He also bought a high-quality camera to pursue his photography hobby and upgraded his car to a model he'd always admired. These weren't reckless purchases. Walter had carefully considered his financial situation and determined that he could afford these things while still maintaining his financial security. But when Walter's family and friends learned about his purchases, the questions started flowing. "Walter, don't you think you should save your money instead of spending it on luxuries? What if you need that money for healthcare later? Isn't that camera a bit extravagant for someone your age? Do you really need such an expensive car?" At first, Walter tried to justify his spending. He explained his financial planning, showed them his budgets and projections, and detailed how these purchases fit into his overall retirement strategy. He talked about his good health, his long life expectancy, and his desire to enjoy his money while he was still able to do so, but his explanations only seemed to generate more questions and concern. "But Walter, what if the market crashes? What if you live longer than you expect? Shouldn't you be more conservative with your spending?" The underlying message was clear. His money wasn't really his to enjoy. It was a resource that should be preserved for others or for some hypothetical future emergency. Walter began to feel guilty about his purchases and his desire to enjoy his retirement. He started second-guessing every expenditure, even modest, ones like a nice dinner out or a weekend getaway. The joy he'd felt about finally being able to afford things he'd always wanted was being replaced by anxiety and guilt about not being responsible enough with his money. The situation reached a breaking point when Walter's nephew approached him about lending money for a business venture. When Walter politely declined, his nephew said, "Uncle Walter, you're spending money on trips and expensive hobbies, but you won't help family. Don't you think you should save your money instead of wasting it on yourself?" That question, calling his enjoyment of his own money, wasting it on yourself, was the wake-up call Walter needed. He realized that people were trying to redefine his financial responsibility to match their interests, not his well-being. They wanted him to save money not for his own security and happiness, but for their potential benefit. Walter discovered the wisdom of the Stoic philosopher Seneca, who wrote, "It is not the man who has too little but the man who craves more who is poor." Walter realized that the people questioning his spending were revealing their own poverty of spirit, their inability to appreciate that money's highest purpose is to provide security and happiness for the person who earned it. The next time someone asked Walter if he thought he should save his money instead of spending it, he chose silence. He didn't provide financial statements or justify his budget. He simply looked at them calmly and changed the subject. His silence communicated that his financial decisions were not up for debate or approval by others. Here's what Walter learned, and what you need to understand. Your money is yours to spend, save, or give away as you see fit. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your financial choices, and you certainly don't need to live like a pauper just because you've reached retirement age. You've worked hard for your money, and you have every right to enjoy it while you're alive and able to do so. The Stoics understood that money is a tool, not a master. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best way to take care of the future is to take care of the present moment." Taking care of your present moment might mean spending money on experiences, hobbies, or things that bring you joy and fulfillment. It might mean being generous with yourself after decades of being responsible and conservative. The question, "Don't you think you should save your money instead of spending it?" is based on the assumption that your happiness and enjoyment should be secondary to preserving wealth for others or for some uncertain future need. It suggests that once you reach a certain age, you should stop living fully and start existing in a state of financial fear and restriction. When you answer this question with detailed explanations of your financial planning or justifications for your spending, you're accepting the premise that your financial choices need approval from others. You're allowing people who don't have to live with the consequences of financial restriction to judge how you use your own resources. But here's the truth. You can't take your money with you when you die, and you don't know how many years you have left to enjoy it. Being financially responsible doesn't mean living like you're poor when you're not. It means making thoughtful decisions about how to use your resources to create the life you want while ensuring your basic security. Walter is now 71 and has taken 3 more cruises, upgraded his photography equipment twice, and is planning a trip to Europe. He's also set aside money for potential healthcare needs and has made provisions for his family in his will. But he's doing all of this on his own terms without seeking anyone's approval or permission for how he spends his money. The people who used to question his spending have either learned to respect his financial independence or have stopped commenting on his choices. Walter's life is richer, more adventurous, and more fulfilling, since he stopped trying to justify his right to enjoy his own money. Your financial security is important, but so is your happiness and quality of life. When someone questions your spending choices, they're really questioning your right to enjoy the fruits of your labor. Your silence protects your financial independence and your right to make your own decisions about how to balance security with enjoyment. Remember, you've worked hard for your money, and you've earned the right to spend it in ways that bring you joy and fulfillment. You don't need anyone's permission to enjoy your financial success, and you don't owe anyone an explanation for choosing to live well while you're able to do so. Now let's explore the 6th question that tries to control your romantic choices and why your love life is nobody's business but your own. The 6th question you should never answer after 55 is, why don't you date someone your own age? This question is loaded with ageist assumptions and reveals how society tries to control even your most intimate choices based on arbitrary age-related expectations. It suggests that romance and attraction should be governed by birth certificates rather than genuine connection, compatibility, and mutual affection. It also implies that there's something inappropriate or unseemly about forming relationships outside of your assigned age bracket. What makes this question particularly invasive is that it treats your romantic life as if it's public property, open to judgment and commentary from others. People feel entitled to have opinions about who you should be attracted to, who you should date, and what kind of relationship is appropriate for someone your age. But your heart doesn't consult a calendar when it comes to love and companionship. The question also reveals a deep misunderstanding about what makes relationships work. Age is just one factor among many that contribute to compatibility. Shared values, interests, humor, and life goals are often much more important than having been born in the same decade. Yet people will focus solely on age differences as if they're the determining factor in relationship success. Let me tell you about Patricia, a vibrant 62-year-old retired teacher who found herself single after her husband's death 3 years earlier. After a period of grieving and healing, Patricia felt ready to explore the possibility of companionship again. She joined online dating sites, attended social events, and remained open to meeting new people. Patricia met David at a community photography class. David was 51, 11 years younger than Patricia, but they discovered they had an incredible amount in common. They shared a love of travel, photography, literature, and had similar views on politics and life philosophy. Their conversations flowed effortlessly. They made each other laugh and they enjoyed each other's company immensely. As their friendship deepened into romance, Patricia felt happier and more alive than she had since her husband's death. David was kind, thoughtful, and treated her with respect and affection. Their age difference rarely came up in their conversations because they were focused on their shared interests and growing connection. But when Patricia's family and friends learned about David's age, the questions began. Patricia, why don't you date someone your own age? Don't you think 11 years is too big a gap? What do you have in common with someone so much younger? Are you sure he's not just interested in your money? What will people think about you dating a younger man? At first, Patricia tried to defend her relationship. She explained how much she and David had in common, how well he treated her, and how happy she felt when they were together. She detailed their shared interests and values, trying to show that their connection was based on much more than physical attraction. But her explanations only seemed to fuel more questions and concerns. But Patricia, what about when you get older? Will he still want to be with you? Don't you think you're setting yourself up for heartbreak? Wouldn't it be better to find someone who understands what it's like to be your age? Patricia began to doubt her own judgment about the relationship. Maybe they were right. Maybe the age difference was too significant. Maybe she was being naive or foolish. The constant questioning made her feel like she was doing something wrong by following her heart, instead of societal expectations about age-appropriate dating. The situation reached a crisis point when Patricia's daughter confronted her directly. Mom, I'm embarrassed to tell my friends that you're dating someone younger than me. Why can't you just date someone your own age like a normal person? That comment, like a normal person, was the moment Patricia realized that the questions about David's age weren't about her happiness or well-being. They were about other people's discomfort with seeing her break free from their expectations of how a 62-year-old widow should behave. Her relationship challenged their assumptions about aging, romance, and what was appropriate for someone her age. Patricia found wisdom in the words of the Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who taught that no one can hurt you without your permission. She realized that by constantly defending her relationship, she was giving others permission to judge and criticize her choices. She was allowing their discomfort to undermine her happiness. The next time someone asked Patricia why she didn't date someone her own age, she chose silence. She didn't provide explanations about compatibility or shared interests. She didn't defend David's character or their relationship. She simply looked at the person calmly and changed the subject. Here's what Patricia learned and what you need to understand. Love and compatibility cannot be reduced to a mathematical equation based on birth years. Relationships work when people connect on emotional, intellectual, and spiritual levels. Age can be completely irrelevant if two people genuinely care for each other and share common values and interests. The Stoics understood that happiness comes from living according to your own values and judgments, not from conforming to other people's expectations. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject." Most people who question age gap relationships have never experienced the joy of connecting with someone outside their expected age range. The question, "Why don't you date someone your own age?" is based on outdated social conventions that treat age as the primary factor in romantic compatibility. It ignores the reality that people of the same age can be completely incompatible, while people with age differences can have wonderful, fulfilling relationships. When you answer this question with explanations about your relationship or justifications for your choices, you're accepting the premise that your romantic life needs approval from others. You're allowing people who don't have to live with your decisions to judge what kind of companion would make you happy. But here's the truth. Your romantic life is your business. Whether you date someone older, younger, or exactly your age, the only opinions that matter are yours and your partner's. You don't need anyone's permission to pursue love and companionship wherever you find it, and you don't owe anyone an explanation for following your heart. Patricia and David have now been together for 2 years and are planning to move in together. Their relationship continues to be a source of joy and fulfillment for both of them. The people who initially questioned their age difference have either learned to accept their happiness or have stopped commenting on their relationship. Most importantly, Patricia has learned to trust her own judgment about what makes her happy. She's discovered that age-appropriate dating is less important than values-appropriate dating, and that the best relationships are built on mutual respect, shared interests, and genuine affection, not on matching birth certificates. Your heart doesn't check ID cards when it comes to love and companionship. When someone questions your romantic choices based on age, they're revealing their own limitations and prejudices, not any deficiency in your judgment. Your silence protects your right to pursue happiness and companionship on your own terms. Remember, you've lived long enough to know what you want in a relationship, and you're wise enough to make your own decisions about love and romance. You don't need anyone's approval for your romantic choices, and you don't owe anyone an explanation for following your heart wherever it leads. Now let's examine the 7th and final question that's designed to make you feel like a burden, and why this toxic assumption deserves nothing but your dignified silence. The 7th and final question you should never answer after 55 is, aren't you worried about being a burden to your family? This question is perhaps the most psychologically damaging of all, because it plants a seed of fear and self-doubt that can poison your relationships and your sense of self-worth for years to come. It suggests that your very existence as an aging person is inherently problematic, and that you should be constantly worried about becoming too much trouble for the people who supposedly love you. What makes this question particularly cruel is that it transforms natural aging into a source of shame and anxiety. It implies that needing any kind of help or support as you get older makes you a burden, rather than a human being deserving of care and respect. It turns the normal interdependence that exists in all healthy families into something you should feel guilty about. The question also reveals a fundamentally toxic view of human relationships. It suggests that love and care are finite resources that can be depleted, rather than gifts that are freely given between people who care about each other. It implies that your worth as a person is tied to your independence and productivity, not to your inherent value as a human being. Let me tell you about Grace, a 73-year-old retired librarian who had always been fiercely independent. Grace lived alone, managed her own affairs, and took pride in not needing help from anyone. She had raised 2 children as a single mother, and had always been the one others turned to for support, not the other way around. When Grace developed arthritis in her hands, simple tasks like opening jars and carrying heavy grocery bags became challenging. When she had a minor fall in her home and sprained her ankle, she needed temporary help with errands and household tasks. These were normal, manageable changes that many people experience as they age, but Grace began to worry about what they meant for her future. The worry intensified when well-meaning friends and acquaintances started asking pointed questions. "Grace, aren't you worried about being a burden to your children? What are you going to do if you need more help? Don't you think your kids are worried about having to take care of you? Are you prepared for what might happen if your health gets worse?" At first, Grace tried to reassure herself and others by detailing all the ways she was still independent and capable. She would list her activities, her health practices, and her preparations for the future. She would explain that she had long-term care insurance, that she was staying active and healthy, and that she hoped to remain independent for many years to come. But the questions kept coming, and they began to change how Grace saw herself and her relationships with her adult children. She started to view every small request for help as evidence that she was becoming a burden. When she asked her son to help move a heavy piece of furniture, she felt guilty. When her daughter offered to drive her to a medical appointment, Grace wondered if she was already too much trouble. Grace began to isolate herself to avoid asking for any help at all. She struggled with tasks that would have been easy for her, family members to assist with, simply because she didn't want to be seen as a burden. She stopped sharing her health concerns or daily challenges with her children because she was afraid of confirming their worst fears about her aging. The situation reached a breaking point when Grace's daughter noticed that her mother seemed withdrawn and anxious during family visits. When she asked what was wrong, Grace broke down and confessed that she was terrified of becoming a burden to her family. She had been losing sleep worrying about future scenarios where she might need care or assistance. Grace's daughter was shocked and heartbroken. "Mom, you're not a burden. You're our mother. We love you, and taking care of each other is what families do. You took care of us for 18 years, and we're honored to be able to help you when you need it." That conversation was Grace's wake-up call. She realized that the question, "Aren't you worried about being a burden?" had been poisoning her relationships and her peace of mind. She had been allowing other people's fears and assumptions about aging to define how she saw herself and her worth. Grace discovered the wisdom of the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius, who wrote, "The best way to take care of the future is to take care of the present moment." Grace realized that she had been so focused on worrying about hypothetical future scenarios that she was missing the present reality. She was loved, valued, and supported by her family. The next time someone asked Grace if she was worried about being a burden to her family, she chose silence. She didn't launch into explanations about her independence or her preparations for the future. She didn't try to prove that she wasn't already a burden. She simply looked at the person calmly and changed the subject. Here's what Grace learned and what you need to understand. The concept of being a burden is a toxic social construct that has no place in loving relationships. In healthy families, caring for each other is not a burden. It's a privilege, an honor, and a natural expression of love. The same children who once needed you to feed them, clothe them, and care for them when they were sick don't see helping you as a burden any more than you saw helping them as a burden. The Stoics understood that interdependence is a natural part of human life. Seneca wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." Sometimes the end of complete independence is the beginning of deeper, more meaningful relationships with the people you love. Accepting help gracefully is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of wisdom and trust. The question, "Aren't you worried about being a burden?" is designed to make you feel ashamed of the natural changes that come with aging. It assumes that needing help makes you less valuable as a person, and that your family views your needs as problems rather than opportunities to show love and care. When you answer this question with reassurances about your independence or detailed plans for self-sufficiency, you're accepting the toxic premise that needing help makes you a burden. You're allowing other people's discomfort with aging and caregiving to become your own anxiety and shame. But here's the truth. You are not a burden. You are a human being deserving of love, care, and support. You have given love and care to others throughout your life, and accepting help when you need it is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of trust in the relationships you've built. Grace is now 76 and has learned to accept help from her family with grace and gratitude. When she needs assistance, she asks for it without guilt or apology. When her family offers help, she accepts it as the gift of love that it is. Her relationships with her children have deepened because she's no longer afraid of being seen as a burden. The people who used to ask Grace about being a burden have either learned to keep their toxic assumptions to themselves, or Grace has limited her exposure to their negativity. Her life is more peaceful and her relationships are stronger, since she stopped allowing other people's fears about aging to become her own. Your value as a person is not determined by your level of independence or your ability to avoid needing help. When someone tries to make you worry about being a burden, they're revealing their own discomfort with aging and caregiving, not any truth about your worth or your relationships. Your silence protects you from accepting toxic assumptions about aging and dependency. It preserves your dignity and your relationships from the poison of shame and guilt. It honors the truth that love is not diminished by caregiving. It's expressed through it. Remember, you have loved and cared for others throughout your life. You have earned the right to be loved and cared for in return. You are not a burden. You are a blessing, and anyone who truly loves you knows this. Your silence protects this truth from people who would try to make you forget it. Now, let me share with you the deeper wisdom that ties all 7 of these questions together, and why your mastery of strategic silence is one of the most powerful tools you can develop at this stage of your life. Now that we've explored these 7 questions that you should never answer after 55, I want to share with you the deeper truth that connects them all and transforms your understanding of silence from a passive response into an active form of wisdom and self-protection. There's an ancient Stoic parable about a wise oak tree that had weathered many storms over the course of a century. One day, a young traveler approached the tree and began asking it questions. Why do you grow so tall when shorter trees are safer from lightning? Why do you spread your branches so wide when narrow trees require less space? Why don't you bend more in the wind like the flexible saplings? Don't you worry that your size makes you too conspicuous? Aren't you concerned about taking up so much room in the forest? The oak tree listened to all these questions in complete silence. The traveler grew frustrated by the lack of response and demanded, "Why won't you answer me? Don't you care what I think about how you should grow?" Finally, an older traveler who had been observing this exchange approached the young man and said, "The oak tree doesn't answer your questions because it understands something you don't. Its worth is not determined by your understanding of it. The tree grows according to its own nature, its own needs, and its own wisdom accumulated over a century of seasons. Your questions assume that the tree should modify its growth to match your comfort level, but the tree knows that your comfort is not its responsibility." The young traveler protested, "But shouldn't the tree care about fitting in with the other trees? Shouldn't it be concerned about what others think?" The older traveler smiled and replied, "The oak tree's silence is not indifference, it's wisdom. The tree has learned that some questions are not requests for information, but attempts to control its growth. By remaining silent, the tree protects its right to flourish according to its own nature." This parable captures the essence of everything we've discussed today. Like that ancient oak tree, you have accumulated decades of growth, experience, and wisdom. You have weathered many storms and learned what it takes to thrive. You have earned the right to live according to your own nature, your own values, and your own understanding of what makes life meaningful. The 7 questions we've explored are not genuine requests for information or expressions of care. They are attempts to control your growth, to limit your expansion, and to force you back into smaller versions of yourself that make others more comfortable. Each question carries the underlying assumption that you should modify your life to match someone else's expectations of what someone your age should think, feel, want, or do. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The universe is change, our life is what our thoughts make it." When you allow other people's questions to change your thoughts about yourself, you give them power over your universe. But when you choose strategic silence, you protect your mental space from invasion and maintain sovereignty over your own life narrative. The Stoic philosophers understood something that our modern culture has forgotten. Not every question deserves an answer, and not every opinion deserves consideration. They taught that wisdom lies not in having responses to every inquiry, but in knowing which inquiries deserve your mental and emotional energy. Epictetus, who was born a slave but became one of the greatest philosophers of his time, understood the power of strategic silence better than most. He taught that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. But he also understood that there are times when listening itself can be harmful, when the words being spoken are designed to diminish your worth or control your choices. The questions we've discussed today share a common thread. They all attempt to make you feel smaller than you are. They try to convince you that your dreams have expiration dates, that your choices need external validation, that your happiness is less important than others' convenience, and that your natural aging process is something to be ashamed of. But you know better. You know that age brings wisdom, not obsolescence. You know that experience teaches discernment, not submission. You know that time is precious, not wasteful when spent on your own priorities. You know that your value as a human being is inherent, not dependent on your productivity or independence. Your silence in response to these questions is not rudeness, it's self-respect. It's not avoidance, it's protection. It's not weakness, it's strength. When you choose not to answer questions that diminish your worth, you're actively preserving your dignity and maintaining your power over your own life narrative. Seneca wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." Today marks the end of feeling obligated to justify your choices to people who have no right to judge them. It marks the end of explaining yourself to people who have already decided not to understand you. It marks the end of accepting other people's limitations as your own. And it marks the beginning of something beautiful. The beginning of living with complete authenticity and freedom. The beginning of trusting your own judgment over other people's opinions. The beginning of understanding that your silence is not empty space, it's powerful presence. Remember the stories we've shared today. Frank, who chose skateboarding over safety concerns. Dorothy, who chose peace over productivity explanations. Robert, who chose boundaries over guilt trips. Eleanor, who chose her beloved home over others' expectations. Walter, who chose enjoyment over hoarding. Patricia, who chose love over age-appropriate dating. And Grace, who chose trust over burden anxiety. Each of these people discovered that their silence was not the absence of response. It was the presence of wisdom. They learned that some battles are won not by fighting, but by refusing to engage. They discovered that the most powerful word in the English language is often no, and the most powerful response is sometimes no response at all. As you move forward from today, I want you to remember 3 essential truths about strategic silence. First, your silence is not selfish, it's self-preservation. You have worked too hard and lived too long to allow other people's insecurities and control issues to disturb your peace of mind. Second, your silence is not rude. It's respectful of your own boundaries and dignity. You show yourself respect by refusing to participate in conversations that are designed to diminish you, and you teach others to treat you with respect by modeling what that looks like. Third, your silence is not weakness, it's wisdom. You have accumulated enough life experience to recognize when words are being used as weapons against your happiness, and you have developed enough inner strength to protect yourself from those weapons. The ancient Stoics believed that the highest form of freedom was freedom from the need for external validation. When you stop answering questions that are designed to control you, you achieve this freedom. You become like that wise oak tree, rooted in your own values, growing according to your own nature, and unshakable in your sense of self-worth. If this message has resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe to this channel for more wisdom that will help you live with dignity and strength during this important stage of your life. Each video is designed to help you navigate the challenges and embrace the opportunities that come with age and experience. And if you've made it this far, I want you to leave a comment with the phrase, "I choose silence over submission," and tell me which of these 7 questions you found most challenging or enlightening. Let me know where you're watching from around the world. I love hearing from viewers who are committed to living with intention and strength. Remember, strategic silence is not about becoming antisocial or cutting off communication with people you care about. It's about becoming selective with your energy and protective of your peace of mind. It's about recognizing that not every question deserves an answer, and not every conversation deserves your participation. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might need to hear this message. Sometimes a single insight about the power of silence can transform how someone approaches their relationships and their boundaries. The 7 questions we've discussed today will continue to come your way, from family members, friends, acquaintances, and strangers. But now you have a new tool for dealing with them. You have the wisdom to recognize them for what they are: attempts to make you smaller, more manageable, and more convenient for others. Your life is not a democracy where everyone gets a vote on your choices. Your happiness is not a committee decision that requires consensus. Your dreams are not subject to approval by people who have forgotten how to dream themselves. You are like that ancient oak tree, strong, rooted, and magnificent in your full expression of who you are. When the questions come that are designed to make you doubt your growth, remember the power of dignified silence. Let your presence speak louder than any explanation ever could. This is your time. These are your years. Live them with intention, protect them with wisdom, and never apologize for choosing silence over submission, dignity over explanation, and self-respect over the comfort of others. I'll see you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring how to live with strength and purpose after 55. Until then, stand tall like that wise oak tree, embrace the power of strategic silence, and remember that your worth needs no defense because it is absolute and unshakable.